Let's turn to politics, and there are details of a deal between the UK government and the DUP on import and export goods. That has all now been revealed.
Well, the Northern Ireland Secretary said the deal was right for the Union, but Sinn Féin has suggested this could be the first step towards a united Ireland.
Joining us now is the former advisor to Tony Blair, Paul Richards. Paul, this is all very interesting, isn't it? Because, of course, this was one of the reasons that the DUP were accused of failing to agree to go into power sharing, because Sinn Féin would immediately start talking about power sharing as now the senior partner in this power sharing agreement. Where do you view it all?
Well, I think it's vital that we do keep the union together, and I don't think Sinn Féin's rhetoric will be matched by any kind of action at all. I think that this is the role of Sinn Féin, is to talk up the idea of a united Ireland, but I don't think that's where this is heading. I mean, the whole mess comes out of Brexit, though. You know, without Brexit, none of this would be happening in the first place. We had perfectly good trading arrangements between the north and south of Ireland before this, and we've had an absolute bag of spanners for the last 3 years trying to sort this mess out. Some glimmers of hope there, obviously, with the arrangements in place today, but let's see.
It's interesting, isn't it, that the DUP are talking about the deal and the success that they've made of this, and the reason they were holding out for so long was because they wanted to get this arrangement. But Sinn Féin are ignoring that and going, well, hey, we are now we're essentially the senior partner in this power sharing agreement, and let's talk about the future of this island. The
most important thing, though, is the peace process, I would say, and it's just maintaining that peace, which maybe we've just become a little bit used to over the last 25 years. But if you grew up in the 70s and 80s, you know, that ongoing terrorist war was part of life, and we've not had to live with that for 25 years. So that's the most important thing, just to keep the peace in place and make sure that this kind of rhetoric from Sinn Féin and others too is not allowed to, make things worse.
What do you think happened which meant now we've been able to, after months of fairly bitter negotiations and stalemates and really complicated legislation when Westminster is suddenly in charge, what do you think happened which meant now we come to an agreement that all sides can say, OK, I'm with this?
Well, the most important thing was getting Stormont up and running again, so that Northern Ireland has its own devolved assembly running things. I mean, as you know, there were massive public sector strikes, lots of money was being held up in budgets that couldn't be spent. There was this kind of sclerosis in the political system, which everyone, I think, has just come to the end of their tether and just said, look, for heaven's sake, we need to sort this. The people of Northern Ireland voted to have a devolved assembly. It had been suspended for months and months and months, and now finally we're going to get some politics back. So hopefully it is the beginning of the end of a long period of uncertainty, but again, we'll just have to see what happens.
Have the DUP got proper concessions here in terms of, we've heard about these changes in the arrangements to trade, and of course this has to be agreed with the EU, with Ireland, as well as what's happening on mainland Britain. Is there sort of progress? Is it going to make things easier for Northern Ireland to actually import, export goods and trade within?
Well, I think it'll be less friction than there was, but I don't think it's going to be easy. And the whole Brexit mess, you know, with where the border should it be along the sea? Obviously, nobody wants a land border with trade going back and forth across there with, restrictions. So we'll have to see how it works out in practice. But I mean, what a mess we're in. We didn't need to be in this mess. It's all about Brexit, really, and we shouldn't be here in the first place.
And yet we are, and then it looks like a significant breakthrough, at least this week.
So. Fingers crossed.
For sure. Should we look at politics, back in Westminster? And the Labour Party are very keen this week to position themselves as the party of business. What is the pitch, and why do you think it's credible?
It's very credible, and it's a very bold pitch. And Labour, after some years, I think, where businesses feared a Labour government, and they worried that Jeremy Corbyn would come in and nationalise them and we'd have state-controlled businesses. Now Labour, under Starmer, is saying, look, we can be pro-business and pro-worker. And Labour set its goal of being the biggest growth in the G7. After the first term, which is an enormous pledge if you think about how fast growth you would need to have to beat Canada and France and Germany and everybody else. And they're saying we can't do that without business. So this is an open pitch to business, really putting the tanks on the Tory lawn here. And it seems to be working because, of course, the business community is looking afresh at Labour. Today's conference happening later on today, the biggest of its kind, we say. And there are business leaders who are openly endorsing the Labour Party. That would have been unthinkable under Jeremy Corbyn.
You don't get the sense that business leaders are beating a path to Labour's door, do you? You just get the idea that they're pragmatic people who understand that Labour might well form the next government, so they need to start finding out exactly what Labour are promising them.
I mean, that's a fair point. Some of them are not not exactly enthusiastic, but some of them are. And I just think that if you talk about growth, you talk about government marshalling the forces of business to create that economic growth, that's going to involve investment, it's going to involve skills, new jobs. That's the sort of sound that the business likes to hear. So I think there is an openness and a willingness to look at Labour afresh, and the work that Johnny Reynolds and others have done, I think, really does open that door. So, business is always going to be on the side of who helps their business.
Yes.
On the other hand, the fact that it's Labour at all is astonishing. So we've come a long way.
There's been some fairly awful stories. We've just been talking about what happened in Clapham, what happened in Bristol over the weekend with those 2 teenagers knifed to death. James Cleverly is saying, I want police to be back to basics. He's also saying, I'm going to try and keep any sort of public criticism private. A bit of a change in approach, because Suella Braverman was obviously, very stinging of the police and some of the decisions that they've made. Is it time maybe for a reevaluation to say, we need to sort of support this organisation rather than criticise it constantly?
There's a kind of irony klaxon going off about this. One, he's used a private meeting of the police to grandstand and leak what he'd said and his warnings to them about neighbourhood policing and all of this. And then to, the splash in the Times this morning. And the second irony is, of course, that it was his government that cut 20,000 police off the streets in the first place. And we saw certain types of crime go up as a result. If you seed the ground in that way and take the cops off the streets, then the criminals step into the vacuum. And today he's talking about neighbourhood policing. Now, his is a government that cut by 50% the number of the police support crime community officers. So he's going back to the idea that was there before the cuts. And I think it's a little bit disingenuous, to be absolutely honest.
I think the challenge when we look at the Labour Party's proposals, I think they've said 13,000 more community police officers. And then when you look down at the funding model, that's when it gets a little bit more complicated about how they'd actually deliver that. But for now, Paul, thank you very much for your time.
Welcome.